Thank you all for joining us here this morning. It is our pleasure to welcome Dutchess County Executive Marc Molinaro, the Republican candidate for governor of our great state, to hear about his vision for New York. I'd like to start by asking for a moment of silence in memory of the victims of the attack of the Tree of Life Synagogue this past weekend in Pittsburgh. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and the hope that our nation can heal. We at ABNY have something in common with our guest today. One of the iconic images of ABNY is of our founder, Louis Rudin, and other business leaders sweeping the streets of the west side of Manhattan as part of Operation Clean Sweep. Marc Molinaro, who was elected to the Tivoli Board of Trustees at the age of 18, and who became the youngest mayor in our country at the age of 19, is remembered similarly in his hometown. Local residents can still recall their teenage mayor gathering people to help sweep the streets and sidewalks after storms. Gestures matter. And this one matters a whole lot when you think of all the other things a teenager could be doing with their life. Yet, there he was, the youngest mayor in our country, sweeping the streets to help his neighbors, and that is constituent services. Part of Marc's charm is that if you ask him why he got into politics, he'll correct you. He'll remind you that he is in the business of public service. And he has been serving the public for over 24 years. First on the Tivoli Board of Trustees, then as the mayor, then in the Dutchess County Legislature, then in the New York State Assembly, and now as the Dutchess County Executive. He was raised by a single working mother who was for a time on public assistance. He persevered, and today he can boast about a career full of accomplishments. In recent years, as county executive, he has implemented a comprehensive economic development strategy, preserved farmland and protected open spaces, saved taxpayers millions by consolidating county services, and in a project that is near and dear to his heart, he launched Think Differently, an initiative to change the way we all relate to our neighbors with special needs. This program ensures equal access and specialized service to those living with special needs and developmental disabilities. This initiative rightfully caught the attention of communities around our state who are adopting many of the Think Differently principles. He is here this morning to talk to us more about what he hopes to accomplish for the state of New York. Please join me in a warm ABNY welcome for Marc Molinaro.
Good morning, and thank you. I appreciate that introduction. I've often enjoyed when I'm introduced as being the youngest mayor. I happen to be the youngest county executive in Dutchess County history, which just reminds me that I've had a very long history of being young. I will not, however, be the youngest governor in New York State history, but nevertheless, I am a big fan of those who have come before me. I'm thrilled to be here, and let me start just by being exceptionally candid with all of you. I'm grateful that you would provide us the opportunity this morning, and I mean that genuinely. We are all better as a society, as a democracy, when we take time to listen to one another. And I certainly expect that all of us in this room have a heck of a lot more in common than that which might divide us. But I can tell you that having spent every day of my adult life in public service, thanks for mentioning that, every day in public service, I can tell you that I have always done better. And the people I serve have always benefited more when we tone down the rhetoric and spend more time listening to one another. And I think that to the great fear of the people who help me write speeches, I think that's what I want to talk about today. And that is we as a society and we as a state need to do better about listening to one another, learning from one another, and in the end, serving each other. We have seen over the course of the last several months a heightened degree of anger that has erupted in horrific violence. So whether it is individuals who think it is okay to send pipe bombs to prominent people in our society, or the horrible tragedy we saw over the weekend. We have been infected by anger, and that is corrosive, and it is hurting us. And leaders ought to spend more time embracing the need to be an example instead of pointing blame. You know, it is so easy now, more than ever, to simply say, well, it's the other guy's fault. Sure, it probably is. It is somebody else's fault. But I can tell you, having spent every day of my adult life trying to lead by example, that it requires the anger that is infecting us. It requires us, each of us, to take a look in the mirror and take responsibility for our own actions. I mean, imagine what we've experienced in these last few weeks and what occurred over the weekend. Holocaust survivors killed by a rain of bullets in America. I mean, imagine the horror that they lived and the tragedy that they overcome and the hope that they had when they came to this country and thought in America they would find the place where they could live and lead and love. And yet, over this weekend, someone who thought politics and political and public belief should be expressed in violence took their lives in this country. It is unacceptable. And yes, it is unacceptable for a president, it is unacceptable for a governor, it is unacceptable for a county executive to stand before anyone and say anything other than we ought to combat what is anger and intolerance and hatred. We ought to combat it with love. You know, in the aftermath of Martin Luther King's assassination, Bobby Kennedy was encouraged not to go to the neighborhood. He was encouraged to stay out of what would have been a fragile and delicate moment. And yet, as a leader, he chose to do otherwise. And he said before a mourning crowd of Americans who saw their hero taken out in a reign of terror, in an assassination, he said that we must combat anger with love. Now, I know what it sounds like to have a Republican candidate for anything stand in front of you and suggest that love is more valuable or more important than anger or hate. But I have to tell you, as somebody who cares deeply about my community, the people I serve, and most importantly, about what my kids think of me, I can tell you we would all benefit from taking a lesson from Mr. Kennedy. We would all benefit from, instead of pointing the blame, look inward and try our very best to do and be our very best, because people demand it, they expect it. And I would tell you that we are better than this. And so I'm going to use this moment in front of all of you to tell you who I am and why it is I want to serve. And it starts today by expressing my thanks not only to all of you, but also to the media, the press. You not only write the first draft of history, you have a whole constitutional right dedicated to you. You are not the enemy. You tell and retell the story of who we are and who we hope to live, who we hope to be. And I may not always enjoy the very first version of what you do, but I can tell you this. As someone who believes in transparency, someone who believes that government ought to be challenged, as someone who believes that the media has an enormously important role, I will start by extending my appreciation. Because it is when government is challenged, when elected officials understand that they are not in charge, whether president, governor, or anyone else, they are not in charge. It is when you do your job, challenge us to be better, expose us for what we are and who we are all better for it. So I don't often, and I'm sure you don't often hear speakers come before you to thank the press. But I do. Now, I actually do like the New York Times today. They had a really nice profile of me. I looked almost genuinely compassionate. Of course, the New York Post did tell a good story. Yesterday, I saved a life. Tomorrow, I'm bringing peace to the Middle East. If you didn't get to read either of those, you should. Listen, with all kidding aside, I offer to you today and this morning that this nation has always been great because we've sought to be better. And I'd offer to you that that's where we ought to begin. We ought to be better. So let me tell you about a little bit about my history, who I am, and why I'm running. So you all have heard that 24 years ago, as an 18-year-old, I had interned for my state assemblywoman. She and I didn't share party affiliation, but she encouraged us into service. She challenged us to believe that public service is about helping people and responding to the needs of those we serve. And as a young kid, I started to volunteer in my hometown, a small village. In fact, there are almost more people here this morning than there were in Tivoli, New York. 1,300 residents. We are not all related, but we're very close. And I decided to run for office because I heard from my elected officials that we couldn't do certain things. Every time there was a challenge, we couldn't do it. Every time there was some problem that needed to be solved, they didn't want to respond. So I said, well, if these people could run for office, so could I, because clearly intelligence was not a prerequisite to holding elected office. And in 1994, as an 18-year-old, I ran for the Village Board of Trustees and was elected. Served on the village board for a year. The mayor had decided to retire. He's 20 years in service, and he asked us village board members, any of you interested in being mayor? So, of course, I ran home and asked my mom if it would be okay. And in March of 1995, I was elected mayor of my hometown. And I learned as a village mayor the value of actually being a public servant, something that too many who hold statewide elected office forget. They forget it. They think that being an elected official is about power and money. And believe me, I know how to read campaign finance reports. Not many of you are in mine. But, well, hey, listen, I'm just being honest. But let me tell you what I learned then and believe now more than ever. We need elected officials who understand that their decisions have profound impacts, and that they not only need to lead by example, they need to be involved in making the decisions happen, not dictating from Albany down, but being a part of bringing people together to solve the major problems that face us. And where we are failing as a state is that we think that decisions get made by men and women standing behind podiums, that great problems get solved by folks with nice lapel pins and fancy ties in Albany, making policy and decision and expecting us to understand it. I'm sorry, that's not how it happens. It's not what ABNY does. It's not what community organizations all across the city of New York and the state of New York do. We empower people to solve problems together. That's when we succeed. And so, having been a village mayor, we're sweeping the streets and fixing potholes. And by the way, I learned how to fix a water main break and unstick a sewer pipeline, which by the way, will probably help me in my return to Albany. It was a good joke, I thought. I can tell you that what I learned then and believe now is that the decisions we make have real impacts on real lives. And I think that where we are losing as a state is we forget that. Listen, there are two New Yorks. There are. And with all due respect, there's the New York that you and I probably live in today, which seems a little bit more privileged than it should be, seems a little bit more easy for some, where decisions get made by folks who seem to be able to pay for access in government. And then there's the other New York. There's the other New York. And it's the one I lived as a child. And it's real. And it's a challenge. And I'd ask you to think about it. I was born to a remarkably wonderful two parents. My father walked out when I was very, very young. My parents divorced. And I can remember to this day the arguing. And I remember my brother being in the bunk bed above me, and I can remember the night my father left. And then I can remember the challenges my mother had. She had lost a child when she was a little bit younger, who would have been my older brother. Perhaps as a firstborn, he'd be the one running for governor today. But I remember both the struggle that my mom had and the life that we led. Born in Yonkers, New York, where family was always around us, I can tell you that my parents wanted to get out of the city and move to the country. For you, Beacon, New York is upstate. For me, it's nearly downstate. And my mom struggled really hard. And I thought as a kid, by the way, that the electric company called everybody to check in to see how they were doing. But I was forced to grow up very, very quickly. Food stamps put food on the table, and I thought I was the luckiest kid at the James V. Forrestal Elementary School because I didn't have to pay for lunch, and all those other guys did. I can only tell you that I realized at a young age how very important government could be, although I didn't know it specifically, and how very intrusive government could be. I remember the time we were waiting in line, ironically in the Dutchess County Department of Social Services, which now I'm responsible for. And a woman who probably had a very bad day, she didn't mean anything by it, made my mother feel so small. The system that was created to help her, welfare, social services, food stamps, because of an individual's bad day, made her feel so insignificant. And I remember as a kid what that felt like, because my mom, who I thought was the strongest woman I had ever met, had seemed weak and was made to feel small. So fast forward to today, and I can tell you what informs me. What informs me is that the life that we led that got me here reminds me that government can be very, very helpful, and that we need an active, limited, helpful, and compassionate government, but it can also be very intrusive, that those who abuse their power can be, well, abusive. And so in 2018, after deciding I wasn't going to run for governor, I ultimately decided I would. Thanks, Ed. You're not going to shout at me, are you? Ed Cox has this uncanny ability just to have these outbursts in the middle of speeches. You may have experienced one. I had decided not to run, and then I was convinced to run for governor of the state of New York. Why? Well, you would think it was because people in my party had encouraged me to do so, and they certainly did. But what was most impactful was there were lives and individuals who had helped me I had helped over the course of my service, and they said, we need you to stand up. In particular, and thank you for acknowledging, families of those living with developmental disabilities who had encouraged me to be involved and wanted me to advocate for them. So I ran home and asked my wife if it'd be okay I run for governor of the state of New York. She said no, and here I am anyway. But I can tell you that in 2018, I'm running for governor of the state of New York because there are, in fact, two states. And there are too many who struggle too hard, like my mom. Now, they don't know what they want to be the solution, many, but they want leaders who at least lead with compassion, who don't think, by the way, that having more money in their campaign account is a way in which to make a difference. They want leaders who are compassionate and empathetic and care and are talented and willing to sort of set aside differences and focus on solutions. So I'm running for governor of the state of New York because our state is too expensive. Our state is too corrupted. And the systems of government that we have created to provide help to those who need it the most are bankrupted. Not just financially, but morally and ethically. So whether it's a train system that doesn't bring people to or from where they're supposed to go on time, or a welfare system that too often keeps people trapped in generational poverty, government isn't effectively making the change that needs to happen. And so in our state, there are those who continue to struggle every day, convinced that their government, and I'm sorry, but their governor doesn't care. And so I'm running for governor of the state of New York because I want to invest in the human capital of New York. It's about time that somebody who's actually lived the struggle of New York, who understands how difficult it is to live in New York, actually serves in that capacity. And I'm sorry, I don't mean it to be disrespectful or dismissive of anyone. I just mean it to be real. That too often we elect people who forget how difficult it is to live and work in New York. And so here we are in 2018 with only a few days left before our election. I'm running for governor of the state of New York because it is too expensive. And for those of us who are burdened by the cost of living in this state, I can assure you that in upstate New York, the price of living continues to grow. We shoulder the highest burden of taxation, the highest burden of property taxes, and we continue to force people out of our state. Whether we acknowledge it or not, were it not for immigration into New York, our population would be declining. Upstate New York, communities have been hollowed out. 18 to 35-year-olds are leaving in droves because they can't find work and they can't afford to stay here. Seniors who can't afford move out to retire someplace else because we're the least friendly place to retire. because we don't have the opportunity and it isn't as affordable as we once were. And to say otherwise is just to ignore the plight of so many people. On Long Island, 71% of 18 to 35-year-olds say they will leave within 5 years. I mean, that isn't a message of outward hope and optimism. That suggests that we're educating people to go to work someplace else because the job opportunities are not here. The two New Yorks that exist is that 80% of the jobs created in the last 8 years have been here, right around this block. Yet everything else upstate continues to be challenged, and communities continue to be challenged. And so how do you turn it around? How do we address it? Well, by being honest. Start by being honest. We as a state need to recognize that we are pricing ourselves out of existence. It just is. And so we're committed, I'm committed, should I be given the honor of being governor of the state of New York, but to drive down the cost. Yes, for us, it starts with property tax reduction. 30% property tax decrease over 5 years. And by the way, there are some who say, well, that can't be done. Watch me. Watch me. You know, John Kennedy stood before the world and said we're going to put a man on the moon. He didn't get to see that day. But sometimes it needs and demands that we act in a bold way. Cut taxes, make it easier, and invest in the system so that we invest in people, we make it easier. So for me, it starts with property tax reduction. We'd like to eliminate the death tax because there are too many people forced out of this state who have means, retire someplace else, take their resources someplace else. And think about that. Our economic development strategy is all about taking money out of hard-working taxpayers' pockets to give it to other people to compensate for the fact that we took money out of hard-working taxpayers' pockets. It's not economic development, it's money laundering. It shouldn't be. We ought to be investing your resources in the underpinnings and the infrastructure of government. That's transportation, that's infrastructure, that's education. There are whole school districts outside of the city of New York that have 50 and 60 and 70% reduction in population. Imagine that. And we're not producing the outcomes we once did. We ought to be investing in our education system to prepare kids from kindergarten to employment, to make sure that our educational outcomes meet our economic needs. We don't. We're educating kids to go someplace else, to work someplace else, to live someplace else. That isn't a message of success. Government ought to be focused on the things that we should be doing well: transportation, infrastructure, education, healthcare, support for those who are most vulnerable. And this state isn't doing well enough there, and too many people struggle because of it. So I don't want to expand my time, and I'd much rather answer some questions because that's who I am. But I want to say this to you. We can do better. New Yorkers deserve us to do better. And while I may not be able to fill this room with 200 or 300 people, I welcome the opportunity to have an engaged conversation with those of you who chose to be here with me today. And I am going to spend the next 6 days working across this state to make one thing perfectly clear. Too many New Yorkers struggle too hard and believe their government doesn't care enough. And they're right. They're right. So I want to end also by acknowledging what is a passion of mine and very important, I think, for all of us. So I was born and raised on food stamps, and I can tell you that that informs who I am. I struggled every day. My family did. That informs who I am. And then fast forward to being adult, I can't imagine thinking that a kid who grew up on food stamps would be standing before you as a candidate for governor of the greatest state and the greatest nation the world has ever known. But I can tell you that it is humbling. But what has been equally humbling and gratifying is, as an adult, I was blessed and am blessed with 3 wonderful children, with a 4th on his way. Go big or go home in my family. November 25th. I've been trying to encourage my wife to give birth in the next couple of days. I really think that would be great. No, I'm kidding. Please don't quote me. I have 3 wonderful children, one of whom was born with a developmental disability, lives on the autism spectrum, has a seizure disorder. And I can tell you, as a man of faith, I pray. I can tell you that when my daughter was diagnosed, I asked God why. And I thought back as a kid, I really didn't have much interaction with those with disabilities. I probably didn't necessarily reach out to make friends with kids like my daughter. And then I realized why. Maybe to make me a better dad, but more importantly, perhaps my daughter and her challenges remind me of the value of life. And I hope for one moment that you might listen to this. Those who live with developmental disabilities in our society are left out. There are too many who feel marginalized and ostracized. Why? Because there are some who still believe that you can only achieve based on what we perceive your ability to be. It is the last prejudice in this country that needs to be confronted, the silent, quiet prejudice of low expectation. And in this state, we ought to be embarrassed about how we provide services for those with developmental disabilities. We don't create enough job opportunities, we don't have enough housing opportunities, and we have a transit system that leaves people stranded. We have a separate and unequal education system, one that educates kids through general ed. You walk through the door. My son Jack walks through the door, gets his education. My daughter, hand-to-hand combat to receive services, to get through a system that isn't funded appropriately and treats those with special needs as an afterthought. And so we launched Think Differently in my county because of a failed dad. I wanted to do better for my kid, but also because as a government and as a society, we need to do better. We launched Think Differently as a way to encourage both employers and community organizations, business groups and governments to break down barriers, to make our community, our businesses, our society more accessible to those who live with developmental disabilities. And today in my county, it is universally accepted. We think differently. And now 100 communities across the state of New York have embraced our Think Differently principles. And I'm here to tell you today, not only do I hope you listen briefly to the message I've offered to you, but you find some way in your own life to open up new opportunities. Think about the people you work for, the people who work for you, the people you work with. Are there chances or opportunities to create job opportunities for those with developmental disabilities? Can you break down some barrier? Can you welcome some family member who's struggling to get through the system to get help? Can you make it easier for them? Those with developmental disabilities have the highest unemployment rate of any of our society. In this state, we've dismantled services for those living with developmental disabilities. Housing is on the verge of a crisis because we don't create enough opportunities. And try to get a train or a subway car if you're in a wheelchair. So please, I ask of all of you, please, try to come up with some new way to create new opportunities. Because if nothing else, we as a society ought to be judged by how we treat one another. And those living with developmental disabilities need to be treated better. Those with developmental disabilities ought to be treated better. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful for the few moments I've had with you this morning. I know that there's an opportunity to answer some questions, and I hope you have a few, because I'm much better at answering questions than I am giving speeches. But I can offer to you this. I am dedicated to tenacious civility. My commitment to the people of the state of New York is to be a leader you can believe in, to be a governor you can be proud of, and to be a human that you can not only feel good about leading the state of New York, but have faith and comfort that I will always strive to do what is right, to do what is best for the people I serve. And my decision-making will not be influenced by political contributions or who's powerful, who isn't. My decisions will always be based on what is right and what is best for the people I serve, as it has been for the last 25 years. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Bill.
Bill, sure.
I was born and raised in Westchester. And your comments about, my name is Bill Colonna. I was born and raised in Westchester. And your comments about Westchester and New York being too expensive really resonated with me, because when I got married, my wife and I were trying to figure out where we wanted to live. And
Dutchess is a really nice place.
we unfortunately had to make the decision to leave New York because we just couldn't afford it. So your comments about a 30% tax reduction really resonated with me. But I'm wondering, how would you reconcile that with what seems to be underinvestment in infrastructure and mass transit in the state. How would you be able to combine
Sure.
the two to make it so that New York is affordable, but also the trains run on time, the bridges are paid for, and the roads are drivable?
Yeah, well, stop wasting money. I mean, I understand that New York is not, we don't spend too little. We just don't spend smart enough. And so, first of all, this state forces more state spending onto local taxpayers than any state in the country except for New Hampshire. I mean, understand that. So in every place else in the country, state responsibilities are paid for by the state, not in New York, not by this government, and not by this governor. The focus has been to take our cost and shift it off to somebody else, local property taxpayers. That's what we do. Joe Biden has had a quote that he used often, and my granddad used to say it, "Don't tell me what you believe in, show me your budget." Well, if New York really believed the things that we say we believe in, you'd think we'd be paying for them. So first, start by taking responsibility for those expenditures, and that's how you drive down costs. Now, I would offer to you, one of the things I want to achieve is for Albany and New York to pay for some of those mandated expenditures like welfare, social services. We shift to local governments. You might say, well, how do you do that and still make proper investment? So that's basically your question. Take responsibility. We, as a state government, and what I've done is a county, first let me say this, as a state government, we don't establish outcomes, we don't measure success, and we don't prove whether or not we're spending money effectively. We don't. In welfare and transportation and just about anything we do, we don't have a measurement. I mean, in the business community, you establish an outcome, you use a metric to judge whether or not you're achieving it, and then if you're not achieving it, you don't spend the money. Not in Albany. We just take what we did last year and add 4.5% to it this year. It's not acceptable. What I did as a county executive was begin to modernize the delivery of services. We lean on private sector investment. We partner with technology to really measure success. And if we're not spending money effectively, we don't spend it anymore. And we've been able to enhance services to the mentally ill, for drug addiction, in infrastructure, and we still are able to lower taxes because we set out on the mission to be more effective and efficient in the delivery of service. Albany needs to do the same thing. Now, beyond just that, so just beyond a really modernizing a state government and being more efficient in the delivery to drive down cost, stop wasting money on things that don't make sense. I mean, cutting checks and giving it to private sector interest is not economic development. Those are billions of dollars that should be spent on infrastructure, on the investment in services and the resources that people actually rely on. So I'd stop that and focus economic development on infrastructure investment and what have you. That's the way you get a better outcome and you drive down cost. And it is absolutely achievable. For those of you who endured an hour on CBS, if you watched the debate, I mean, you should have been in the room. It was cold, and I'm not talking about the temperature. But when the governor says it can't happen, it just means we're not trying hard enough. It has to happen. Often I hear from folks who say to me, well, how will government pay for blank if you do that? Well, how will ordinary families pay for that? How will you pay for that? We can't continue to do this. So identify outcomes, measure success, achieve efficiencies. We'll shave billions of dollars from the system. Focus economic development and sort of that investment on infrastructure, on transportation, on education, not on wasteful vanity projects that make us feel good but don't produce outcomes. And then I offer to you as a geeky government guy, if you get one-time revenue, this state, by the way, secured $17 billion in court settlements over the last 8 years. What would you use one-time revenue for? To run up your credit card? That's what Albany did. No, I'd use the money to drive down debt and invest in one-time expenditures, put it towards infrastructure, make the system function. And by doing that, you not only get the benefit of lower costs to taxpayers, but you get a better outcome, which generates economic growth and ultimately more people benefit. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Samantha Plusser.
Hi, Samantha.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
I'll let you know on the 6th of November how I'm doing.
I'm from New York City, but I remember a while back when I did this PBS thing where we had to go around the state and see all the different parts of it.
And there are lots of parts of it.
And I had no idea, actually, is my point. I just was like, this can't be all of New York. And I think that generally that's the consensus of people who live here, that New York's a very big place, and I had no idea. So my point is in Albany, when you go up to Albany, you sort of don't know what happens there. Is where my
Don't worry, the people who work there don't know what happens there either.
Well, right. So I guess my point is transparency is a big thing, and my issue with state government is being a lawyer and someone who follows this stuff is I really don't know whatever happens there even now. And is there any way you can sort of talk to that, and if
Yeah.
there's a way, if that's just the way that it is, or with state government, or is that with this particular governor? Because I mean, it would be nice to see, even the Times when they cover it, they're like, well, the budget wasn't passed, now it is passed, but they never release what it actually did or accomplished, or where that money goes afterwards, or who it's going to in terms of the counties, or what we actually accomplished when it was passed. So would you be able to sort of talk to what you might be able to do there?
In 90 seconds or less. So you speak to what is really our biggest problem, and that's transparency, accountability, and then the corruption that grows out of it. So I'm not going to make this personal because I've chosen the next 6 days to actually be an example of civility, but I will tell you the system is corrupted. It is absolutely corrupted, and it's stealing from you. It just is. Decisions get made in the dark of night. People don't get to know. In fact, I served in the New York State Assembly. I can tell you the ink is rarely dry on the bill when they're voting on it. And this isn't like some, rhetorical sentence like, well, we need to read the bill before we vote on it. Well, you have to understand, even the people we pay to read the bills haven't read the bills when they're voting on them. So number one, I believe in transparency, and we've done this in my county government, we ought to do in the state. That means relying on technology. So the solution to some of what we need to do, and I will admit to you, this administration is cloaked in secrecy more than most. So greater transparency, reliance on putting more and more information on the web. I believe in what's called the database of deals, but not just a database that tells you where we've contracted, the state spent your money, but I mean all our contracts, unionized contracts, deals that get made on economic development. It should all be online and accessible to all of you so you can measure it and evaluate it. But more importantly than you just reading it, it's so they can read it. The media, using its constitutional right to challenge us and hold us accountable, has information. The other is spokespersons and public information officers within the departments within state government are not cheerleaders for the governor. That's not their job. Although these days you might question whether or not that's true. They are there to provide information based on your need to know it. So I would empower those people to be true spokespeople, public information officers for the public responding to your questions and concerns. So greater transparency through use and reliance on making public information available on the web, reliant on public information officers to actually do their job and be more responsive to the public and the press. That is valuable. And then I would ask the legislature to pass my Accountability Act. It is the most comprehensive ethics reforms ever presented by a gubernatorial candidate, and I think I even outpaced Teddy Roosevelt. My point being that there needs to be sweeping reform necessary to end the pay-to-play. I'll make your life easier, by the way. You won't have to contribute so much to political campaigns because I'll make it illegal for people to contribute to candidates if you're doing business with the state of New York, at least for a period of time. If you're appointed to a government agency, I don't want you cutting checks. I mean, think about how much money you could invest in things that you really care about instead of it contributing to political campaigns. The other that we will do is pass an actual universal ethics code and an ethics commission appointed by the judiciary with no attachments to those in office. I will appoint a Moreland Commission to be the sheriff of Albany, to actually enforce the law and hold legislators, executives, Republicans, and Democrats accountable, and to scare the hell out of them to pass the reform that's necessary. And I'd ask people like Preet Bharara and Zephyr Teachout to serve on it because it's so important to me that we set the right example. And for the media's sake and all of yours, I would empower the Committee on Open Government. This is, by the way, the most boring committee of anything that anyone that does any work in Albany. But this is the group that opines on open meetings and freedom of information. Yet it has no teeth. You want to scare the heck out of politicians? Give them the ability to enforce the law. And to say that if you withhold information, you can be criminally liable. Because at the end of the day, you have every right to know how we spend your money, how we make our decisions, and who is taking what from whom and getting what in return. And I would use the power of the executive to force a vote because it is that critical. It is what is breaking and bankrupting New York. The lack of accountability, the lack of transparency, and the thought that those who are in power can do better only if they consume more power. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Am I allowed to ask people?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning, Governor. Oh, I'm sorry. Candidate.
I like your optimism.
Okay. I have a question. My name is Brown, Dr. Will Brown.
Sure.
I have a question about small businesses, which you don't hear much talk about nowadays, especially in campaigns. Small businesses that face a lot of legislative issues, a lot of problems when it comes to growth and development opportunities. Now, there are some laws, there are some provisions in certain operations now, set asides and special programs that have small businesses. But then on the other hand, there are some legislative issues that treat small businesses the same as an employer that employs 1,000 employees. The employer that employs 2 or maybe even 1 is faced with the same legislative requirements, the same legislative restrictions and mandates as the employer with 1,000. Some of those issues, for example, might be in the healthcare issue, but another may be, for example, in DOL, Department of Labor, that will treat small business requirements and small business mandates when it comes to exclusions and other issues, the same as it does a large employer. What's your thought about the plight of small businesses nowadays?
First, small business remains the backbone of the American economy. In New York, of course, small businesses remain the backbone of New York's economy. We do have a one-size-fits-all regulatory system, which creates and adds greater burden to the small and medium-sized businesses all across the state of New York. So my first response to you is, well, first, outside of the city of New York, small businesses principally pay property tax, and of course they pay income tax through personal income taxes, both of which need to provide greater relief. So our commitment to 30% property tax relief over 5 years, allowing small business owners to write off more of their payroll to offset the regulatory burden placed on them. In fact, currently small business owners can write off 100% of their payroll. Our proposal is they could write off 200% of their payroll, which will provide some relief because of the new burdens placed on them. I'm not in a position to tell you that I'd start rolling things back. I wouldn't. But if we're going to pass new regulation out onto businesses, the legislature and state agencies ought to publish what the cost is to an average business person, an average taxpayer, so that they understand that by making this decision, you're adding XYZ cost on the back of a business. So in essence, a fiscal impact statement, so that we know before we consider anything what the cost is, and then try to create a regulatory system that recognizes small and medium-sized businesses need a little more freedom, a little more relief to kind of function. So that's where I would start. Property tax relief, some income tax benefit, and then some regulatory relief for small businesses. What you should know is that 70% of new jobs in New York are created by existing small businesses. So what that means for us is that the biggest return on the least investment in economic development is by supporting existing businesses, why organizations and others like yours across the state, by helping to strengthen the workforce, by providing some assistance to existing businesses, we have the greatest benefit to grow new jobs. That's where we get the biggest return on the least investment, and I think that's where we have to focus. Over here. There's a gentleman over there who's had his hand up the whole time. He's very patient. And it's not Ed Cox.
Thank you. My name is Derrick Gibson.
Derrick.
I was born right here in New York, Manhattan. I moved away to the South. My family moved away, and I was raised in the South. But I love New York, so I came back. And I didn't know this place was this terrible. Talking about terrible, the MTA. I spent more time on the MTA than with my family. I was living in Queens when I moved back. It took me 3 hours just to get to Manhattan from Queens, waking up at 5:30 in the morning, get on the train at 6, and I'm still late to my job at 9 o'clock. So what are your plans on the MTA? And also the MTA is spending so much money just for 1 mile of track, $1.5 billion on 1 mile of track.
Yeah.
So are you planning to do the same thing, or are you planning to change that? And I'm a union guy. I understand the union has got a lock on it, but that's not right. It should be shared with the non-union people so we can get it done. I don't want to wait 15 more years sitting on the train to get to work.
Yeah.
So what are your plans for that?
Well, fix it. We'll fix it. First, the state has to take ownership for the MTA. It is our responsibility. No one should be fooled. New York State is responsible for New York City's transit system. We have been for decades, and to pretend otherwise is just a political game of hot potato, and it really needs to come to an end. So number one, I will take responsibility and ownership of the MTA and the failings of the system. Number two, I apologize to its current leadership, but I will ask them to leave. Quite frankly, the leadership structure today at the MTA has too many entanglements, too many conflicts of interest, and too little commitment to actually getting the job done. And therefore, we need professionals, transit professionals. By the way, Andy Byford is a professional focused on the underpinnings of the system. So signal switches, subway car stock, track repairs, platform repairs, the basics. Get back to focusing on the real priorities, not ribbon cuttings and the colors of tiles and tunnels wherever they happen to be, but focus on those things that make the system run on time. Now, our plan for fixing the MTA also acknowledges what are some antiquated and archaic labor rules that, by the way, are not really all that beneficial to the people who work there, but because we continue to think this is the way we do it, we just keep doing it the same way over and over again. So we actually propose a series of changes to labor costs and say if we're going to save $1, we should share it with the employee. So at the very least, we wring out efficiencies, we generate new savings, and we don't make the employee the enemy. They're not. But we identify some real labor reforms to address that. We also say that on major capital projects, this is the only public authority, transit authority in the world, that relies on its existing staff to make investments in major capital projects. We say bid them out, contract out. They could be with labor, certainly trades. There's no question. We're not trying to get rid of or not focus on unionized labor, but contract out, identify whether or not a private partnership will generate savings, and if it generates savings, share that with the employees and get the project done. You're right. We spend 5 and 6 times more money on a mile of track in New York than any other place in the world. And it's not because Paris doesn't have good labor laws. It's because we waste too much. And so wring out the efficiencies within the system. I do not think that we should pay $1 more to the MTA until you get the savings necessary. You can't possibly expect people, all of you, to go back into your pockets and spend more money knowing you're not getting what you pay for in return. So it demands ownership, it demands accountability, it demands greater transparency, reform to the labor rules that cost too much money, and focus on the priorities of making the system work. Now, let me also tell you this. I suspect if I win on Tuesday that I will be given one opportunity to get this right. One chance. I mean, it will be a political earthquake, right? I will spend every day of the 4 years that I've been given as governor to fix the problems that face us. So, by the way, it means fixing Medicaid and social services so that those rely on those services actually get help. But it means making the system, the MTA and the transit system, function. And so hold me accountable. I mean, I'm the only person who's going to stand on this stage and say, over the next 4 years, I want you to judge me on the next 4 years. Someone else will say, elect me and I want you to judge me on the last 8 years. I'll leave that to you. But I am telling you that if given the opportunity to be governor, we're going to fix the system because the system isn't working. So it really means establishing those outcomes, measuring the success, and holding people accountable. And it starts with leadership at the MTA. It just does. And getting the political decision-making out of what should be a transit or transportation decision-making. This young lady has a question. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to tell you that all of this, but by the way, I actually thought running for governor meant presenting policies. So on our website, you can visit MolinaroForNY.com. You can see our corruption plan. You can see our transit plan. You can see our veterans plan. You can see our developmental disabilities plan. And you can see the one we're releasing today, an opportunity agenda that focuses on creating job opportunities throughout the state of New York. Focuses it not on cutting checks, but on empowering people. This young lady seemed very interested in asking a question. Her hand went like that.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Jillian. I'm a Cloro Fellow in Public Affairs. My question is, what will you do to protect the LGBTQ community in New York, especially trans and gender nonconforming New Yorkers?
No matter what the federal government does, I will enforce the Constitution and the protection of everyone's individual civil liberties. I promise you that. So that means I would work with the state legislature to ensure that we have state policy that protects anyone regardless of expression, identity, or who they love, and for how long they've loved them. I believe it is a civil right and ought to be protected. So just telling you that I believe the Constitution provides those benefits, I'd work with the legislature to ensure that we have the adequate laws to protect those regardless of expression or identity. It's not up to me to judge how one wishes to live their life. It's up to me to ensure the Constitution and the laws of the state of New York protect them. That's my commitment. And I will offer to you, since we're being exceptionally candid, right? I'm allowed to be exceptionally candid. Listen, I've evolved over time. I mean, I have. I mean, being a dad, being a husband, being a failed father changes the way you look at things. I will tell you, I did vote against same-sex marriage in what last year was voted on, and it was my opinion at the time. But the day it became law was the day I celebrated as a civil right, because that's the way it's supposed to be. Law was changed, and we protect it. That's the way it's supposed to be. So fast forward today, I can tell you I've lived with, and now as a county executive, I know that it is so important that we ensure people, regardless of who they are, who they love, or how they wish to express themselves, have protection under the law. I know that. In my county, we reestablished our Human Rights Commission. We've worked very, very hard to ensure that everyone has equal protection under the law. We actually have these things called 100 cups of coffee. It's actually a training model, but we go from community to community to talk over a cup of coffee. You can tell I need more caffeine. But over a cup of coffee, we talk about some of the more challenging issues, like anti-Semitism that's on the rise, like hatred that we see, like how we treat those who might express themselves or have a different gender identity. We talk about those things because it is through that dialogue and through that conversation that we begin to gain and grow respect. And with that respect, we can make sure that laws are there to protect one another and have a greater appreciation for each other. Because, by the way, when hatred rears its ugly head, having a personal relationship with one another generally helps us get through those moments of very, very difficult times. So you would have the protection. I will absolutely seek and work with the legislature to enforce the Constitution, the laws of the state of New York, and to ensure that we have laws in the state, regardless of what Washington does, that we have laws in the state of New York that protect everyone, no matter who they are or who they love. You really want to ask me about the census? No. You want to do one more?
We will come to it on the census. You talk a lot about helping developmentally disabled New Yorkers. Can you say specifically what legislation, like what would be the anchor pieces of great legislation
Sure.
that would help families in need?
Sure. Thank you for that. So number one, I would appoint a deputy secretary for developmental disabilities to be an advocate within state government to make sure that the state government structure, so the agencies and services that we provide those with developmental disabilities, are better integrated, better advocated, and more accessible. Second, create a single point of contact so that individuals who need to access those services don't need to go to 17 separate agencies, but rather one point of contact, preferably some online web-based service that allows people to kind of navigate the system at a time convenient for them, as opposed to waiting 9 to 5 and calling state government. State government taking over Medicaid costs. This state shifts Medicaid costs to local counties and the city of New York. What that means is that there are 57 separate agencies, units of government that are responsible for administering those services. Medicaid is the largest, most important service offered for those with developmental disabilities. I want the state to take ownership so that we can better provide those services. I want to integrate special education and general ed. Right now, in the state of New York, which is the only state in America that does it, as I mentioned, my son walks into public education. My daughter has to sign up for early intervention, special education, preschool through the Department of Health. The Department of Health, which is responsible for septic tanks and special education preschool. I mean, think about that in New York. So I want to move special education, early intervention into an education system. So integrate the two so that we don't have a separate and unequal system of education. And by doing that, we'll better integrate the delivery of education services and ensure those that need special ed and those in general ed have a more integrated relationship. Beyond that, I'd offer to you that we would create an ombudsperson within state government to help people navigate special ed services so that there's less combat for those services. And without boring you to death with detail, the last thing I would do is sue the federal government. Why? Because when the federal government instituted IDEA, which was its commitment to special ed, it also committed to funding a larger percentage of special ed than we ever have today. That's billions of dollars that should be going across the country to special education and isn't. So what that means, in my estimation, is that we have allowed a violation of those individuals' civil liberties, that we have created a separate and unequal system. And if the federal government doesn't want to pay, then I will litigate. Because it's that important we get those resources into schools, New York City and otherwise, to provide for special education services. And then what I would offer to you is, as much as I think that we ought to have housing opportunities for everyone, we need to create within housing and community renewal, a commitment to creating housing opportunities for those with developmental disabilities. And so I think I wouldn't point to a specific piece of legislation as much as I would say we'd be focused on a sea change, really changing the way in which we deliver those services so that all people, regardless of ability, have access to the support they need, and that we create for them the highest level of integration and independence possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to reiterate what I said when I started, and that just as simply as I referenced Bobby Kennedy, it is intolerance. It is intolerance that hurts us the most. You know, extremists act out, but they start with intolerance. And we often spend a lot of time talking about the final day, and we should. The final day was this weekend when individuals lost their lives. And we ought to speak about that. We ought to mourn that, and we ought to stand in solidarity against that. But we ought to start speaking about the first day. What changed that person? What infected that person? What made that person believe that hatred, intolerance, and anger was acceptable? What made them think that violence was the way to act out? And as a society, if we focus on the first day, education, prevention, intervention, if we focus on tolerance and acceptance, if we say to people that love is a much more powerful tool and ought to actually be embraced and talk about it in an open way, we could prevent these things from happening instead of spending every day mourning after they occur. That is the challenge for all of us. In the face of hatred and anger, it is to decide for ourselves, to act for ourselves in a way that is more loving, more compassionate, and more accepting. And yes, that means we as leaders ought to stop pointing a finger and instead take responsibility. Thank you.